Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. I want to talk to you today about a new project, Coptic Scriptorium, which is a collaborative open source, or it will be, a collaborative open source online platform for digital and computational research in the Coptic language. This project is a collaboration between myself and Dr. Amir Zeldes of the Institute for German Language and Linguistics at Humboldt University. And if Greg's still here, I need to give him a shout out because I actually met Amir at his NEH Perseus seminar last summer, and so that's kind of where this project was born. And my presentation today is basically an introduction, an overview of the project. We're at the very beginning stages, the very startup stages, and so I hope to hear from you how our project can address research questions you might have, how our interests might intersect, and also comments from veterans in the digital classics field on how to help move our project along. So, languages like Classical Greek and Latin have enjoyed advances in digital humanities with fully fledged online research environments like Perseus accessible to students and scholars, but no computational tools for Coptic exist. In fact, no tools exist at all for the Egyptian language in general. Coptic is a direct descendant of the ancient Egyptian language and developed during the Roman period. It consists of Egyptian grammar, vocabulary, and syntax written primarily in the Greek alphabet. Some Egyptian letters were retained, and some Greek, and to a lesser extent Latin vocabulary was incorporated into the language as well. The absence of digital resources exists despite the importance of the Coptic language for a variety of disciplines. Coptic was essential for deciphering or cracking the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs, even though Coptic isn't one of the languages on the Rosetta Stone, because of the connection between the grammar in Coptic and Egyptian. Additionally, Coptic is fundamental to biblical studies and the history of Christianity. A substantial number of apocryphal Gospels and other early Christian texts that were not included in the Christian Bible survive in Coptic. The most famous of these, of course, is the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of 2nd through 4th century texts, especially Gnostic texts that have transformed our understanding of Christian origins. Important early biblical manuscripts also survive in Coptic. And the earliest Christian monasteries developed in Egypt as well. And many of their documents were written in Coptic, not Greek. I know this is a really old school, this is like as old school a map as you can get. I'm working on a new map, and I'm totally excited to use Ryan's a la carte to map some monasteries. So anyway, the Coptic language is really vital to many disciplines: linguistics, biblical studies, Roman history, Egyptian history, the history of monasticism, theology, etc. And as I said, there really are no tools for working in the Coptic language, and there are very few tools even for the entire Egyptian language family. The Thesaurus Linguae Egyptii provides a dictionary tool, a thesaurus for Middle Egyptian, and the Duke database of documentary papyri and other papyrological repositories contain Coptic texts, which are really useful for some kinds of research, but they're limited to documentary papyri and are outnumbered by Greek papyri, right? The Coptic are outnumbered by Greek, and are not really in a format that computational linguists can use. So if we want something for historians and computational linguists, and people from multiple disciplines, we need something else. And so Coptic Scriptorium's objectives are to fill in some of these gaps, to crack the digital code for the Egyptian language. We plan to develop tools and guidelines to produce the first digital repository of richly annotated Coptic literary texts and methodologies to conduct computational research using the corpus. So the components we have planned and that we're starting on now are tools for digitally processing the language, a richly annotated database, TEI-compatible versions of the text for download, extensive documentation, and ultimately a platform where scholars and students will be able to contribute texts and annotations. Before I discuss the components in more detail, I want to say something about our corpus and why it's important. The core of our initial corpus will be text in the Sahidic dialect by the Egyptian monk Shenouta of Atripe, who was widely acknowledged as the most important and influential Coptic author. He lived in the 4th and 5th centuries and led a monastery of up to 4,000 men and women, monks, often called the White Monastery because of the white color of the stone of the ancient church building seen here, and originally constructed during Schroeder's own lifetime. The monastery's territory actually consisted of 3 residences, the 2 men's residences and 1 women's residence. The Red Monastery, shown at the top, the White Monastery in the middle, and then the women's community, which was in the village of Atripe, just to the south of the 2 men's communities. Schroeder's texts form an important source for biblical studies as well as for monasticism, since his writings contain some of our earliest Coptic biblical citations. Additionally, the scriptorium at his monastery copied and distributed biblical, monastic, and theological texts throughout southern Egypt. Schroeder's writings are also instrumental for understanding our history of early monasticism, since they are our largest collection of non-hagiographical texts documenting a life in a monastery from the very earliest period, the 4th to 5th centuries. The White Monastery's library was discovered by Western visitors, scholars, and antiquity traders in modernity. By this point, the Coptic Orthodox Church no longer read or spoke the Sahidic dialect of Coptic, or really much Coptic at all, and didn't fully realize the importance of the contents of the library. The monastery's codices had been stored haphazardly in a small room of the White Monastery's church building, and the codices were ultimately scattered page by page, not book by book, page by page, across the globe as part of the antiquities trade and artifact acquisitions by Western museums and libraries. Only in 1993 was the corpus catalogically reconstructed by Stephen Emmel. And this is just Schroeder's writings. This is not like the entire corpus of the White Monastery Library, but just Schroeder's writings was catalogically reconstructed in 1993. Emmel charted every known folio, which museum or library it was in, and then which codex each folio originally belonged to. So our most important Coptic author, it's been only 20 years that we've known where everything is and how it fits together. Plus, many of the folios remain unpublished. Many of them are just gone. I mean, about 50% of the corpus is gone. And many of the remaining folios are unpublished, and those that are published are sometimes not translated into a modern language. So this spring, Coptic Scriptorium is working on a tiny proof of concept corpus to release in May. Our proof of concept corpus will have 1 Schroeder text plus translation. The text is called Abraham Our Father, a letter Schroeder wrote to the women monks about how they are now one monastic family, brothers and sisters to each other, and it engages in some interesting biblical exegesis. So it's good for history, for biblical citations and references, and so forth. We'll also include a handful of apothegms from the Apothegmata Patrum, or sayings of the Desert Fathers, in Coptic with their original Greek versions as parallels. And we also hope to include a biblical book like Genesis, but this is a little more complicated. Why is this proof of concept corpus so small? The apothegms and Genesis are essentially comparanda. Our star is Abraham our father. But why so small and why only 1 text? As I mentioned, much of Schroeder's corpus remains unpublished, and much even of the published material remains untranslated. Abraham our father is mostly published, not entirely translated, but was severely mismembered in the antiquities trade, with folios scattered across Europe and Egypt. And so because of this situation, the corpus, despite its importance, remains very inaccessible. So this text is scattered. Many of these folios were published in one particular place, but not all of them. I mean, I should have put up a pie chart of where things are, where the folios are published as well. So even more broadly speaking, developing an open access corpus in Coptic has challenges we don't see in Greek and Latin. Greek and Latin have hundreds of years of history of producing editions and translations. Even if these editions have some problems, there are often many editions of one particular text that are in the public domain that you can work with. Even if these, and there are still incredibly useful editions and translations for Greek and Latin that are no longer bound by copyright, even if they're not the most recent. We don't have such a history in Coptic. A huge portion of Schroeder's material is unpublished, And the publications, for example, just take Schroeder, there are 2 major publications. The one on the left, Amelino, is no longer under copyright, but it's rife with errors. In our small protocorpus, I found a couple of occasions where there are entire lines of a manuscript that were missing. And so when I've compared them to the original manuscripts. So that's an issue. And it's not like there's like many Amelinos out there. I mean, that's the one, you know. And then the other major edition is Johannes Leipold, whose copyright was renewed. So that text poses a problem if you're going to try to reproduce it. Other corpora in the Coptic language are also under copyright, important corpora, like, for example, the Nag Hammadi library, the Gnostic corpus, was only discovered in 1945. So for the most part, you know, the editions, you know, unless, you know, people are posting stuff to the web now, the editions really are still under copyright. An open access internet project must use public domain texts. So our solution is to consult the manuscripts of texts, since editorial work is under copyright, but the text itself is not, and some pieces of our text are unpublished. But this is incredibly time-consuming, and these manuscripts push the boundaries of what a third-party service could do in terms of transcription, and this is a difficult project to outsource. I did recruit a couple of experienced Coptic scholars as contributors to help me with this you know, protocorpus. And even then, it was very time-consuming in terms of standard, you know, figuring out the standardization. There's been lots and lots of back and forth just for like 5 apothegms, for example. You know, it's been a good learning experience. So for our corpus to grow, we're going to need collaboration from other scholars who have transcriptions of manuscripts sitting on their computers, and funding to hire students to help transcribe or consult manuscripts for the corpus. Another barrier in my field is our tendency towards perfectionism and really not wanting to release things until they're perfect, which means that there are people who have lots of stuff on their computers that they're just like not, you know, releasing. Amir and I are committed to trying to find a balance between accessibility and accuracy, because the need for our corpus is tremendous. So for example, how useful would it have been to have a digital searchable corpus when the so-called discovery of the so-called Gospel of Jesus' wife was announced last fall? In the debate over authenticity of the fragment, scholars raged over questions about grammar, syntax, vocabulary, and frequency of vocabulary. All questions crying out for a digital corpus. One enterprising grad student in Slovakia slapped together a corpus of the 5 main Gospels from an online but not open source Coptic Bible. But that's about it. I mean, and he did it just for this, because he wanted to kind of search stuff based on this fragment. So questions my project faces are, do we just dump that old edition with all its flaws out there on the internet, or how do we add more texts efficiently when most of the editions are under copyright? How do we get funding for digitization when big funding tends to go to projects that emphasize tools? And so now our objectives in more detail. So as I said before, our project has several components. We have tools for processing the language. We have a font converter in development now, because we have a number of potential collaborators who have a lot of stuff sitting on their computers in pre-Unicode forms. And so like that Amelino edition that I mentioned, you know, somebody gave me his copy of Amelino that had been keyed in. And so it was searchable, but it was all ASCII, right? It was pre-Unicode, so we had to write a converter for it, and it took a lot longer than you might expect. So we want, of course, to have a part-of-speech tagger, a lemmatizer, and a tokenizer. So here's, for example, one of our apothegms from Amasera, and in the Sayings of the Desert Father, so a Desert Mother, showing the layers of standoff markup with lemmas, parts of speech, and so forth, that we are developing tools to, you know, automate. We are not at the automation phase yet, obviously. We're still building our training data and stuff. I think I can skip my little sentences about what a tokenizer is for this audience, which is exciting. Okay, so Coptic poses challenges for the most basic stage of producing a searchable corpus. As a non-Indo-European agglutinative language, many parts of speech combine into one word using a complex system of prefixes, converters, roots, and suffixes. So, for example, this here, this is one word, aljoos, and it's been broken down. This is the perfect tense prefix. This is the subject saying it's third person. This is the verb, which of course is a different form from the dictionary form. And then we have our direct object, is the sigma. And that's all one word.